afternoon. Welcome to Interabang Chats. Joining me today for our small press chat is the guys from Two Lines Press. We've got Michael Holtman and Chad Felix with us today to tell us about their publishing company and a little bit about some of the books that they've published to date and what we can look forward to later this year. So welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us, Lori.
Thanks for joining us.
We really appreciate the invitation to talk with you, and of course, we're grateful to Interabang Books for being such a huge supporter of our press from the very beginning.
Well, we love the work that you do. We love to put your books in folks' hands. Why don't you give us a little bit of background, whoever wants to talk, kind of about, you guys are located in California.
Though Chad lives in New York.
Oh, okay.
I'm broadcasting from Brooklyn, yes.
It's a bi-coastal thing.
Yeah, I'm at Two Lines HQ NYC office right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Global takeover.
Yeah.
I would love to have a NYC HQ outpost, but give me a little bit of background about the press. Michael, I know you've been there pretty much since the very beginning, so maybe you know, give us a little bit of history.
Sure. I'll kind of sketch things out, and we can, dig into the details if you're curious. Two Lines Press is pretty young press. We've only been around for about 7 years. But Two Lines is the kind of evolution of a journal called Two Lines, which was established in 1994 by Olivia Sears, who is an Italian translator. She and a group of people thought that, in the early 90s, there wasn't a lot of attention paid to literature beyond the US. There certainly wasn't a lot of care given to conversations around translation or the art of translation. So she and this small group of people began Two Lines, the journal, which was an annual journal. And through that network of translators and kind of excitement around international literature, she established the Center for the Art of Translation, which is based in San Francisco, California. She is our founder. She is the president of our board, and she's a terrific advocate for our work. So the center was established in 2000, along with a couple of additional programs, one which is poetry translation in schools, and one that is about inviting international writers and translators to have conversations about literature. We felt at the center that we had this incredible network of gifted translators from all over the world working in every genre you can imagine, that we believe there was another way to recognize their work, and that was to establish a press. So the first titles from Two Lines Press came out in, I think, 2013. And we've been publishing more and more titles each year since then. All literature and translation, mostly contemporary writers. We seek out work, if I were to kind of characterize what distinguishes us from other presses publishing literature and translation, certainly an attention to the care and craft of translation, but also we want to publish work that we believe stands up against the best writing in English in the US. So we want the books to be pushing the envelope, to be in conversation with some of those books, and to, in our ambitious way, bend the trajectory of American literature.
And how many books do you guys publish a year normally?
Right now we're publishing 8 or 9 books a year. A combination of paperbacks and hardcovers, mostly fiction, sometimes creative nonfiction. We'll talk a little bit about a collection of poetry we have coming out this fall. All the good stuff, all the things we're excited about.
Well, I've certainly been a big fan of the press, and I've got a few titles that I want to talk about and kind of advance for people out there to learn about and to buy, and we certainly do that in the store at Interabang as well. But Chad, let me know a little bit about your background, when you joined the press, and maybe I'll ask a very unfair question. That what has been some of your favorite? I won't make you name one favorite, but some of your favorite titles, and then I'm gonna give some of mine, that you guys have put out since you've joined.
Sure. Yeah, so my background was in bookselling initially. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I worked at the one bookstore at the time in Vegas, which was a Barnes & Noble. I spent 7 years working at Barnes & Noble total. I moved to New York for grad school about 7-8 years ago, and did some internships in publishing, some small presses. And eventually I wound up at Word in Greenpoint. And I kind of worked there for about 3 years, part-time while I was in grad school, and then full-time after, and kept doing internships as one does. And eventually I ended up working at Melville House, where I started off in one position that evolved to become the director of library and academic marketing. After that, I went to Grove Press, and then I came to Two Lines. And that was about, I guess, 11 months ago now. I'm coming up on my year anniversary. And it's been a really kind of great, interesting, wonderful place to kind of bring my past experiences to and kind of learn how, a nonprofit organization works, which I had never really worked with. So to speak of kind of recent titles, I remember when I was working at Word was when Two Lines, press launched. And so I remember seeing those really early titles come into the store and just kind of being excited by them. And I read the Self-Portrait in Green, the Marie and Jai book, which is like an early kind of little slim novella dash memoir that Two Lines did. And so anyway, I ended up applying for a job, and I got it, and immediately started reading the backlist because it was like, I think AWP was happening and the Journal was celebrating 25 years. So like the Two Line staff was super busy. So I applied for the job, and they would be like, cool, we like you, like, we'll be in touch. And then they like did all of the AWP stuff. So I was like, okay, they're clearly busy. I'm going to read some more of these books. So that's when I like started reading the more recent stuff. And I read Bright at that time, the Dunwad Pimwana book, which is, miraculously the first novel by a Thai woman to be translated into English.
Published
in the US, yeah. And I love that book. It's kind of this like mild-mannered, quiet tale of a young boy who's abandoned by his family and the community around him. It's this community that lives in the shadow of like a high rise, and the community comes together to take care of him. And, he gets into like it has all of the kind of the brightness of youth, the exuberance of youth, but the backdrop, as adults reading this book is like really, really dark. So it's got this like youthful spirit. But you also kind of really kind of can understand the pain he's going through. So I love that one. And that one had just come out, I think, around when I was applying. More recent titles that I've been really, really into, I really took to On Lighthouses, like a lot of people have. That's this book here. I'll hold it up because it's in front of me. This is kind of a series of essays is one way to think of it, or a long essay about lighthouses and loneliness and isolation. And like, it's such a weird book and such a lovely book. And the strangest thing to me about it is how we published it right when everyone was going under lockdown. And it just kind of like appeared in the world, a book about, being selfless by staying home, or like sending a light out into the sea to guide people. So that was like a really kind of a beautiful, like interesting thing. A backlist favorite of mine, which comes to mind now because we're doing another book of his late next year, is Toni Sala. He's a Catalonian writer, and his book, The Boys, was published probably like 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know the exact pub date. That book is amazing, and it's about a small town, and there's an incident where 2 brothers die in a car crash. And it's built, I think, in 4 sections, and each person is kind of this auxiliary character in these boys' lives. And it's, one is so auxiliary that he's literally just driving through the town and saw that the wreck happened. The other one is the girlfriend. And it's just kind of this like weird, interconnected very propulsive, very readable and fun look at kind of this accident, this horrible accident, and how it reverberates out and, influences people's lives.
Well, Michael, I didn't realize, I was doing a little bit of homework before we got started today and looking at your backlist. I thought I was pretty familiar with it, but I didn't realize that you guys had published Jonathan Littell.
Oh yeah, and he wrote in French.
Well, yes.
It's so yeah.
So I'm one of those odd ducks that his huge novel, The Kindly Ones, is one of my favorite contemporary novels. I love that. It's very weird. It's very dark.
Yes.
But it is very fascinating. So I understand that what you published, though, what's the title again?
The Fata Morgana books.
And it's 4 novellas, is that right?
Right.
Okay. And are they interconnected or?
They are. I think as a reader of The Kindly Ones, you will piece together some of Littell's preoccupations, interests. Some of the darkness that you alluded to a moment ago is also present in that slim little book.
The Kindly Ones is, I don't know, maybe like 800 pages. It's big.
It is massive.
And it's about World War II, and in particular, the Nazis during World War II. So does the novella kind of, does it take place in World War II, or is it totally different?
It does not. I feel like I should have prepared.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push you.
I haven't picked that one up recently, but no, it's a little more contemporary. I think that it has its interests are more about kind of characters and obsessions rather than a specific time period.
Yeah. Well, I guess where I was really getting with all of this in a roundabout way is, do you know, is he publishing anything else? Do you know what he's been doing?
Our editorial director keeps in touch with him a little bit. He lives in France.
Yeah.
He's got a young family. He's just it's when you read his work, you imagine the kind of person he is, and he's really just kind of a sweet, charming guy. So he challenges your ideas of what he might be as a person.
So I just wanted to give our audience some background. So Jonathan Littell is the grown son of a very famous American writer, Robert Littell, who wrote some of the, I would say, the defining kind of CIA intrigue novel called The Company. And all of the father's work, and I think he's still alive, Robert, is in English. And I don't know when Jonathan moved to France, but interestingly enough, I think that English was his first language, perhaps, but he writes in French, and then his work is translated into English, which is really kind of an interesting dynamic.
That's right.
And gives us the opportunity to publish him.
Yes, exactly. Well, I hope he's gonna come out with another book soon, and I hope you guys publish it.
It's a good reminder to us, Maureen.
You'll be the first to know.
Yeah. Okay, good. I wanted to talk about some of my my favorites of your list, and now that I'm looking at what I pulled, I'm going to talk about the one that I didn't, and I can't believe it because I saw it on my shelf. I don't have all of your press books together. I should. My shelves are a mess. But I had the distinct pleasure of reviewing Beyond Babylon, translated by Aaron Robertson. I love that book. People are still talking about that book. I reviewed that book for a publication called On the Seawall, and it was listed for for that week's top 5 reviews in LitHub, and that's the first time that I've ever been recognized like that. So that was a very special thing for me. But tell me a little bit about how you acquired that title and what made you decide to publish it.
Sure. Well, for anyone out there who isn't familiar with Ijeaba Shego, it's called Beyond Babylon. I don't have it in front of me right now. It's a pretty massive. Oh,
Chad does. Thank you, Chad. I forgot to pull it.
One of the things that we are interested in doing as a press is kind of challenging our preconceptions of what literature is from certain languages and cultures, kind of disrupting, I feel like there's a sense of, Japanese literature should all be like Haruki Murakami. Italian literature is all, white men talking about the past. And when we first read Beyond Babylon, we were kind of awestruck by this writer's ambition. Certainly all of us right now, we're living through this moment where we're, questioning ideas of, race and white supremacy and, even the ways in which, discrimination happens in a subtle way. We were thinking about that years ago too, when we were looking at this book. It's a book about being a Somali Italian woman in Rome, but the book has much wider reach than that. As as a reader, it spans from contemporary Rome to Argentina and to Somalia, and Ijeoma Shego is recognized in Italy as a really well-known journalist. One of the things that I love about Beyond Babylon is it kind of brings together a lot of her journalistic preoccupations into this, sprawling and beautiful novel about two half-sisters. And I think, it takes on ideas of identity and hybrid identity and, being an immigrant, being a Black woman in the world. When one of our early readers, Chad knows our associate editor, Sarah Coolidge, who oversees a lot of the work that we're publishing in our Calico series, which we'll probably talk about shortly. But when Sarah first read Beyond Babylon, she just kind of carried it into my office, and she had this look on her face. We have to publish this. We have to publish this. So I think all of us, as soon as we read that book, felt this really strong feeling about the work and what it was doing. And, it's just a really incredible, immersive story. And Aaron Robertson is a tremendous translator. One of the other elements of this book is that although we say it's translated from Italian, it borrows from other languages. There's Arabic, Spanish. It's an impressive feat for which I think Aaron has been recognized as a finalist, and certainly in long lists for a few awards over the course of the last year. I think he did a tremendous job.
He did, and it's such a. If I had to put a book in someone's hand that came into the store and said, I want what you would consider a truly global novel.
Right.
That's it. Because it does take on all of these different aspects of cultures and cultural identity and racial identity. And they're all mingled together, but then they're all kind of distinct and have their own distinct preoccupations as well. It's so beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah, it does this really amazing job of creating parallels between like collective struggles around the world. And so like they're all kind of in conversation by virtue of being in a book. But that's also how the world kind of operates,
Right.
Also being peopled by these incredible characters. I love the figures in Beyond Babylon. I was going to say one other thing, kind of building on what you were saying a moment ago, Lori. I often think of Beyond Babylon as a 21st century novel. What does it mean to be a 21st century citizen? And I think that Beyond Babylon is an excellent example of what I look for in what I believe is a 21st century novel.
Right, where we're going.
Yeah.
Well, where we are and kind of where we're going.
Exactly.
All right, I'm gonna go through my greatest hits list, if you don't mind.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're the DJ.
This book, A Spare Life.
Hey, that looks like the galley for A Spare Life.
But the cover was the same, wasn't it?
Yeah, but you've got a glossy cover.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
I
I
obsess about these things.
Yes, this probably is a galley. People, the actual copy of this book is much more beautiful than this. But I love this book. And just to let readers out there kind of know a little bit of the background or what it's about um, conjoined twins. And what amazed me was that someone could inhabit the life and a mind of a conjoined twin without being a conjoined twin. This book just riveted me because there were so many things that I didn't even imagine would be kind of life with someone joined at these guys are joined, I forget, is it the shoulder or the head? I think it's, yes, exactly. The upper, the upper body.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful to me as well, the way that the author kind of talked about they had this burden of always habitating the same space, but then they also had this profound connection that made the thought of their surgical separation just so devastating. And what makes it so special, I think, is that there's parallels between the joinedness and the separation of the twins and what's happening in Yugoslavia at the time, which is where the novel takes place. So that's all the reasons why I love this novel. And I don't know, do you know what this author's doing? And can you please publish more?
Yeah, she's tremendous. Lydia Dimkovska. I don't know if you mentioned it, Macedonian writer. You know, she writes in Macedonian, which is just a language we rarely see. Christina Kramer is a phenomenal translator of Macedonian, as well as Lydia Dimkovska is also a terrific poet. For any readers who are looking for Dimkovska's work, you know, who maybe have read A Spare Life and are, you know, like, I would like to read more from this, you know, woman's point of view. She's a great poet. I think she had a book that you can still find from Ugly Duckling Press that I highly recommend. She's got some other novels that have come out since A Spare Life. We haven't committed to any of them yet, but she's, you know, definitely a really interesting writer. Like you said, Lori, I think the empathy and the, you know, the literary imagination in A Spare Life is so rich, and done with such care that that kind of metaphor that you described is cast very lightly. I was going to add one other thing about Lydia Dimkovska. She came to the U.S. We brought her to the U.S. on a tour, and then she wrote a teeny tiny memoir of what happened, but she wrote it in Macedonian and sent it to me, and I still don't really know what she wrote about us. No, she's terrific. I feel like I was going to add one other little element about her, but you know, I think for readers, I also hope that we see more work from her.
She's amazing. Okay, this book, and I know that you guys aren't the only folks that have published Wolfgang Hilbig, and I've read other works by him, but Sleep of the Righteous is, first of all, I mean, what a title, right?
Oh.
And this book is so lyrical, but it's a little bit dreamy, but I mean, every single line is just like, I'm an underliner when I read, and I mean, I was like underlining like every single line in this book. It's phenomenal. And I know that this author is deceased, correct?
Died, I think, I may have the date wrong, but I think 2007.
Yeah, but he's written an awful lot, and a good bit of it's been translated
By us. That's right. You know, Hilbig is, I think, an astonishing stylist. You know, what an incredible voice. You know, Sleep of the Righteous was the first book that we published by Hilbig. We published it at the same time. Like you said, there's a, for those of you who know Seagull Books based in India, they did a book of Hilbig's called I, which is very good. And they did it with the same translator, Isabel Fargo Cole. We've gone on to publish several of Hilbig's novellas, which are these really rich and slim little books. I don't know if you mentioned this already, Lori, but what I love about Hilbig is he's kind of a complicated, conflicted German writer. You know, he's a post-war writer. He grew up in what was East Germany, but he kind of wrote while he was in East Germany, and the East Germans did not like him, so he was sent to West Germany, and he also didn't fit in West Germany, and while he was in West Germany, the wall fell. And I think he has this really complicated relationship with the entire country and with the language. But he's such a poetic, earthy writer who's, really, I think like many of the best writers he's kind of holding Germans to account, and he sees the way in which everyone is complicit. But these amazing, like you said, I'll sit with Hilbig's work and just want to read passage after passage. We published his book, Old Rendering Plant, which you may know. It's a slim little book, won the Helen and Kurt Wolf Translation Prize because Isabel Fargo Cole is astonishing. But it's basically like a prose poem. It's just this gorgeous language over the course of pages. And of course, Hilbig is interested and excited by, ash and sludge, but he writes about it in the most eloquent way. Definitely a house writer. And you just said something.
No, I was just gonna say, I feel like he's an artist of nostalgia almost. He talks about these places that he's lived or grew up in East Germany, and you can kind of feel and smell and taste them.
Absolutely, or just the weirdness. You were mentioning Sleep of the Righteous, and the book is a collection of short stories, but it has an interesting progression where the kind of central figure in the book is getting older, and of course it's this veiled version of Hilbig himself, which is kind of common in his work. But it starts with these stories of him as a boy in post-war Germany, which is just devastated, and there are no men. All of the men had died in the war or just didn't come back. And he describes this from the point of view of a child early on in this book, and it's just gripping and strange and haunting. And of course, you sense the way in which everyone is traumatized by these historic events. We have another book by Hilbig coming soon.
Oh, good.
I will plug it now. Next year, 2021, we're going to publish what I consider to be Hilbig's masterpiece, which is called The Interim. Again, by Isabel Fargo Cole. That'll come out in September of 2021.
And what's the format? Is it a novel?
It's a novel.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
The longest Hilbig will have done by a pretty good margin. Yeah.
Knowing some of your interests, Lori, with these kind of bigger books, I think you will be satisfied.
Oh, I'm very excited. I mean, he does an amazing job in a succinct format, but I do have that love for like the big ones.
He's such an interesting writer because in addition to writing a couple of big books, he's well known for writing all these novellas, and then he also has these kind of micro stories, like tiny one-page stories that we've been reading and hope to publish some selection of at some point in the future.
So it'd be almost like a collection of flash fiction, kind of?
Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds really cool too.
In the way that Hilbig would do flash fiction. Yeah. So stay tuned.
I'm going to plow through the remainder of my my greatest hits because I want to give you guys enough time to talk about what I know that publishers always want to talk about, and that's like what's coming out, like what's the fall list look like.
It's fun to talk about other books too.
Baboon. This book is great, and she as well has been translated quite a bit. Did you guys do more than this book by her, or?
That is our book. We published a couple of her stories in our journal Two Lines, which is how we discovered Naya Marie. So the first work of hers published in English was Baboon.
And what made you kind of go after her work?
She's awesome.
Yes.
Naya Marie, she's awesome. For anyone who hasn't read Baboon, I kind of think of this as like a house title. These are the kind of books that we're kind of going after. You know, this is a really beautiful book, dark book, beautifully translated.
Collection of stories.
Yeah, it's a collection of stories. Denise Newman is incredible. She and Naya know each other, are friendly, and I think most of the work, I think there's one book that was published by Open Letter that was not published in Denise Newman's translation, but Denise is phenomenal. I love Naya because in this book, she does a couple of things. One, it's these kind of seemingly ordinary domestic situations that are taken to an extreme.
Yeah.
The way she described it, and you know, if she were here, she would describe it more eloquently than me, but she put it as being a very, you know, sensual book. She wanted to talk about physicality and, you know, be really direct about sensation in a way, because people weren't really talking about ideas and thoughts, and she wanted to kind of create this very structured collection that has kind of a visceral feel, even though the stories are very different. And I think that it has this really potent conclusion. The final story is really pretty hardcore.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, and this will bring us into a natural segue to your fall list. My girlfriend. I have such a crush on this author. She is a French Senegalese author. She's written a ton. I think that only part of her body of work has been translated into English and available in the United States. And thankfully, a lot of it is because of you guys. We read this book, My Heart Hemmed In, for our Interabang book club. I think that was back in 2017. It was one of our earlier picks, and it's mostly because, because of my huge bias towards her work, but also I knew that this was an author that a lot of people hadn't been exposed to or hadn't heard of. And she writes in this kind of, I would say, oblique way. There's not a lot of, there's a lot of ambiguity in her writing. You're kind of, she kind of intentionally confuses you with what's going on, but her characters are, you're never really confused about what's in their hearts or what they're seeing or what they're sensing, because that comes across like so directly. And I think for me, it's her character development more so than the mystery of what's going on that just intrigues me. I love her.
So much of what's interesting about My Heart Hemmed In, at least to me, is, like you said, kind of totally understanding where the character's head is at and what they think about and what they believe, but having very little concrete understanding of what has happened to them. So in My Heart Hemmed In, it's a pair of teachers. It's a couple, and they live together, and inexplicably the husband receives a wound, like he has a festering wound, and it's kind of explained where that came from, but you don't really know who did it, and you certainly don't know why. And so you're compelled by this kind of mystery that doesn't necessarily resolve in like a mystery novel sense, but it certainly draws you in and creeps you out.
Well, and then you also, they're ostracized by their community, and
Mhm.
it's not really clear like why, like what did they do? They were well respected teachers in a middle class neighborhood, and then all of a sudden people like don't want anything to do with them, and it's so compelling.
Well, and it's, she's a very complicated writer with a complicated identity with relation to her country, as a Black woman, and so much of what her works are about are otherness and being an outsider. And especially in moments like now, it's like that otherness that she embodies, or her characters embody in My Heart Hemmed In, it suddenly becomes a problem for people, and it's unexplained, and it's kind of ambient, but it's felt by her and her husband.
Because we're talking about this wonderful author, I'm probably not going to go chronologically into your fall list, but I'm going to put That Time of Year into the hands of everyone that I think, I just think this is a very good introduction to her work. It's a slimmer volume, and it does all of the things that she does so well that are kind of trademark Marie Ndaye kind of things. But this book, I think, it starts with like a very almost like a fairy tale premise, that this family, a couple and their young child, go to the same place to vacation every year, and they usually leave before September 1st, and for some reason they stay an extra day or two, and seemingly because of that, the whole place just like turns into another place altogether. It's really cool. Michael, talk about this book a little bit.
I love this book. I love Marie Ndaye. I think you're absolutely, that's a really nice way of putting it, as being kind of an introduction. One of the cool things about publishing translations is you can publish things out of order, and I think that this is a really great book to be coming out right now in this fall. Like you said, she's a singular stylist. I think she's an outstanding writer. You probably know recent reviews have kind of said, here's someone who could be one of the next Nobel Prize winners, and I don't think that's hyperbolic. She's incredible and takes on, like Chad said, these ideas of otherness. It's also worth mentioning, Jordan Stumpf, who is this. It's so funny because we work with lots of translators and many of them are extremely gifted. When Jordan Stumpf submits his manuscripts to us, they are almost flawless. They are just.
I do not envy someone having to translate this woman's work. This would be extremely complicated to translate.
Absolutely, because like you were describing, for if you haven't read any of her work, she has this, what I think is, you kind of touched on the ambiguity of her work. You can't always pin it down, but she writes ambiguity with such precision. It's such a strange effect to read. Some people compare her to Kafka, but I think it has a really different flavor. This book, as you kind of mentioned, it has this, I like that kind of fairy tale premise, where they've stayed one day too long in the town and then everything goes wrong. She's also kind of interrogating, bureaucracy and these, officials. The story goes that, the husband is, wants to know where does his wife and child go? They've disappeared, and people aren't being very helpful, and like there are these strange apparitions. Are they ghosts? It's kind of a little horror story, but it's so much more. I don't know what you would say, Chad. I feel like you talk about this really eloquently too.
I will agree with everyone here that she's a genius and this book is amazing. Something, Michael mentioned Kafka, and I know it's cheap to mention Kafka. But what always fascinated me about Kafka, and that Marie and Jai does as well, is they're allegorical novels in a certain way, but they're inconclusive. Like you could read 500 different ways what this novel's actually about, and so she really, really thrives in that zone of ambiguity and, trying to sort your way through these books. It's not hard to read these books. They're very readable and the style is very welcoming, and that serves her interest in like kind of ushering in this possibility to think about what these things mean, and that time of year could be read in 5,000 different ways. It's about presumably the touristing class, upper middle class, wealthy Parisians going to what they identify as a cute village that they can visit, and it's like their summer thing that they do, and the economy in this village, maybe not as wealthy of a crowd, is based on these people coming and then these people serving these wealthy people. It's like a tourist economy. And it's just so fascinating the way in which the moment that obligation to serve these tourists ends, everything shifts, right? No one's supposed to be there anymore. We're going back to our normal life. Right. And so in the book, it starts raining. His family disappears. The people are still like oppressively kind. Like they're very sweet in a very creepy way. And there's this one really excellent moment that I always think about when Herman, the narrator, has gone to report that his family is missing. The official that he reports to, who he knows by face because he's been going there for years to vacation, the guy says, "Oh well, your complaint is in the queue. We have other issues to get to first." There's no urgency to the privilege of being a tourist anymore. Because tourist season's over. Right. It's so much fun, and it's such a weird, propulsive, fun book.
Before I let you guys get off of the book, this one, I want to understand who picked this cover art and tell me how it evolved. The cover is very interesting. It's not that I would have thought, I have no image in my mind about what the cover of that time of year should be. Yeah. But how did you come about this?
We worked with some great designers. And we looked at a bunch of different covers, and I think that this book is strange. I think that Jaya is she's kind of got a realism, but she's a stylist. Everything has this very Jaya character of how she writes. She writes around things. When we saw this cover, we felt like that is an arresting image of, like you can't totally see the figure, what is happening, is this performance, is this, who's behind is it meant to be, are they playing, are they dancing, are they struggling, and I think that the kind of oddness of the cover felt appropriate for this story. So yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't necessarily represent a moment in the text, but I think that it captures something about, the oddness of this particular book. And of course, whenever I see it, that's cool.
It is cool. No. So this gem comes out in September. Is that correct?
That's right. It'll be a hardcover, a small little hardcover.
Great. So is that your first hardcover?
No, we've been doing maybe one or two a year lately. Beyond Babylon was a hardcover. Another great book we did, Johannes and Yeru's They Will Drown in Their Mother's Tears. That was a hardcover. We've been working with paper over boards as a format recently, and On Lighthouses was the first in that. We really liked how that turned out. So the Njaya is going to be a paper overboard as well.
Great. So tell me what else we can look forward to this fall from you guys.
Fall. Okay. So that time of year is coming out in September. We have this series called Calico that is a brand new series, and
I'll hold it up.
yeah. So, and this is the first Calico that came out in, I think, February or March, That We May Live. And kind of the essential idea behind Calico is, let's talk to the translators we've been talking to for the last 25 years since the journal started, find out what's interesting, what's not being published, what should have an audience, and, what is kind of percolating in other parts of the world that we haven't heard about yet. And so, That We May Live is a collection of speculative Chinese fiction, and it's 7 or 8 stories translated from the Chinese of kind of these like unnerving, uncanny, weird stories about urbanization, late capitalism, and all these kind of excellent topics out of Japan and Hong Kong. Home is new Arabic poetry. So, we're not committing with the Calico series to a particular form, a particular language, a particular anything. It's really about unifying a unifying collection of new and distinct voices that haven't been heard before. So with New Arabic Poems, Home, this is coming out in September. The idea was that, we have this preconceived notion about what Arabic literature does when it's translated into English. We know the types of stories that tend to get translated, the type of poems that tend to get translated. They tend to fixate on war and terrorism and kind of these very, very rough and heavy topics. And that's in this book too, but it centers around the domestic sphere and the kind of the more quotidian, the daily lives of these people through verse. And so you have poems about, I'm trying to think of a good example. Simple things like love, there's love poems in this collection. And there's, a poem about fruit and cutting fruit and thinking about, the decisions you make every day living in a war zone,
And a woman falls asleep on the shoulder of a man on an airplane.
Yeah. And they're kind of they exist within kind of the context that we understand of the politics of the region without being burdened isn't the right word, but without being explicitly about that,
So it's an anthology of poems from the Arab world?
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
Are they all translated by the same translator or different translators?
No, many different translators. It's also, I don't know, Chad may have already said this, but from all over, the Arab speaking world. So I think there's work from, trying to see, I know it's Palestine and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and
Tunisia, Lebanon. Yeah.
Did I say Palestine? I don't know. But from all over, but like Chad said, I think that it pays respect to voices that we don't hear or don't hear enough of. I've talked to editors, you probably have seen some of these books too. I think that sometimes American publishing of Arab language fiction in particular can be kind of cynical. They're kind of looking for the story. It's kind of like they already know the story they want to publish.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of surprise. And my friends who are translators from Arabic, are always kind of, they say that's not all that there is. And
Right.
I think that this little book kind of complicates our understanding of contemporary Arabic literature.
Okay, so the next thing for fall would be our 4th book from João Gilberto Noel, Harmada. So he writes in Portuguese. These are translated by Edgar Garbaletto. Just a wonderful, strange writer. Another one of our, I would argue he's a contemporary writer in spirit, but he died in, do you recall the year, Michael? Fairly recently.
I think 2017.
2017.
Very, very recently, 2016, 2017.
And he's just an incredible writer. Like I said, this is our 4th from him. And this book opens with a man kind of face down in the mud. He gets hit by a soccer ball. A little kid runs up to him and is like, "Oh, sorry, I hit you in the head." And then from that moment forward, you're kind of just thrown into this kind of borderline psychedelic experience of life where he's suddenly in a bar and then he's having sex with a man in a river. He finds himself in some kind of institution where he remembers his love for storytelling, and he has all of the other inmates are wrapped with his ability to weave tales, and so eventually as he's kind of coming to throughout this book, he realizes who he is and who he was, and what he was an avant-garde theater director in the capital city of an unnamed nation called Harmata. And so he's on his way back to Harmata, whether he really knows it or not. And so it's really about his journey to kind of relocate himself in a world of precarity and, struggle. He's got very little. His friends are all kind of scattered around the world, and they're really just, it's about the power of art to make an identity and forge meaning in a world that is real tough, He's a lot of fun, and the thing that is so much of a joy to experience when you read Noel is just the propulsive nature of his work. There's very little, they're very action filled without being books about action. They kind of just, one thing happens, the next thing happens. It's as if life doesn't give you time to reflect on the things you do.
That feels real.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And it's a slim book. I think this is considered to be one of his finest. He's won every award in Brazil, basically. The Premio Djibouti, I think he won 7 times. I think that's right. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. He's won it a lot. And he's just a really fascinating, awesome writer. We compare him to David Lynch often. There's a sense of haunting in everything he does, but there's also a sense of humor,
Who translated that one?
This one,
sorry.
No, this one was translated by Edgar Garbaletto, and he did Lord as well, which is the last book we did by Noel, which was just last year. Yeah.
And we have sorry, I was just going to say we have a couple of other books by Noel translated by Adam Morris. Who, we love Noel. We'll publish more Noel books in the future as well.
And I think you guys have at least one more, right?
I was gonna just give a short blurb about this guy, which just came out within the last couple of weeks. Masatsugu Ono, Echo on the Bay. It's beautiful cover. I love it so much.
We hosted him at the store.
Oh yeah, you hosted him at the store.
For Lion Cross Point.
That's right, for Lion Cross Point, which came out a few years ago. And Masatsugu Ono, contemporary Japanese author, translated by Angus Turville. I love Masatsugu Ono. I think he's so smart. He's an incredible storyteller. I will keep my words about this book short, but it's a short book, but it packs a punch. The story is that there's a policeman who's new to a small village on the coast, and inevitably the kind of townspeople want to meet him and greet him and ply him with drinks, bring him gifts, and tell stories. And some of them seem, they're like the stories that you'd hear from, about the town drunk, or about this trio of guys who don't have jobs, and that's part of what's happening in the book. But what's really interesting, and one of the things that I love about this book, or probably my favorite quality, is that his teenage daughter is listening in, and she's listening in and kind of piecing together these people's stories, and the way in which everyone is kind of part of this town's history, which I kind of think of this story spiraling out It kind of has these very small beginnings, and then it kind of opens up to the whole town, the whole region, the whole country, and Japan's, how they treated people from Korea, and what happened in the war, and there's this trauma that's present in this town. The echo on the bay, and the reason why this cover is red. There's also this kind of mysterious, red. The tide has turned red in this town, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So it's a really Massa, as you probably remember from Line Across Point, he writes with this lightness. It's very conversational, but there's a kind of gravity to this book that I think is really hard for any writer to achieve. It's an impressive feat.
Yeah, we really enjoyed having him at the store. I had the opportunity to have dinner with him afterwards, and he's such a well-read and fascinating guy.
Totally.
He's also a translator.
Yeah.
Really?
He translates from French.
He translates Marie and Daya into Japanese.
Wow, that's awesome.
He's a good person to ask for book recs if you're ever out of ideas. He's a person who will always have a really fascinating pick for you.
Also, we don't always think about this with contemporary writers from other countries, but Massa is extremely well read in contemporary American literature. You may have had this conversation with him too. Like, I'm sure at some point he asked you, what were you reading and what should he read? And he did that at every place that he went across the US and had me send him a bunch of books. So he wants to read what's happening in American literature. I'll also just add one more thing that I think distinguishes Masatsugu Ono as a Japanese writer, since I may have alluded to it earlier in this conversation, but I think of him as, Chad has heard me say this before, but I think of him as like a post-Murakami writer. He's less interested in creating a work that appeals to everyone and is kind of surreal or strange, has these qualities that we associate with Haruki Murakami's work, than writing very specifically about communities that we don't read about in Japanese literature. He writes almost exclusively about people on the coasts. He grew up in a small town on the coasts, even though he lives in Tokyo now. He doesn't write about cities. And he always is, his interest and kind of themes almost always turn back to Japan and the history of Japan. And, I think those themes have a universal quality, but he's a cool guy. Want to do more books by him.
Yeah.
One really kind of, the last thing I'll say about Echo on the Bay, I could probably talk about it a lot more, but one really kind of beautiful thing about it is the narrative structure is, as Michael alluded to, is that there's a younger generation listening to these stories from the older generation. And the older generation has collective amnesia. They have kind of collectively decided to forget kind of the historical atrocities that they sat by. And this young woman is collecting these stories and piecing them together, and in fact revealing to herself that more happened here than I've been told. And so it's about reclaiming history and making sure that these kinds of things aren't lost.
That sounds incredible.
Good.
I'll be happy to put that book into a lot of people's hands, and all of your books. Thank you so much for joining Interabang Chats today. It was such a pleasure to talk to you guys. Always nice to talk about books, and wow, you guys have such a great line. The curation is really just phenomenal. You always have fans at Interabang, so keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us, thank you for all you do for our books, but also for many books in translation. I know that's a passion of yours, Lori, and that's meaningful to us. We love the community that you've kind of built around your store, and I look forward to visiting when I can.
Yes. I hope that's soon. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Michael. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.